Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going on a journey, kind of like a digital treasure hunt, to uncover the mysteries behind seized cryptocurrency. Just imagine mountains of digital coins, those that were once in the hands of criminals. What happens to that crypto? Does it vanish into thin air? Is the government out there holding secret Bitcoin auctions? Well, we've got some pretty fascinating insights to share with you today, drawn from some really detailed notes and a couple of articles from Cointelegraph and Chainalysis. But before we jump into the nitty-gritty, got to give a huge shout out to our sponsor, Paralogic.com, for making this deep dive possible. Seriously, check them out, and if you do, say hi to our friend George while you're there. All right, let's get started.
This is going to be a really interesting journey, I think. We're going to be going through the world of technology, law enforcement, and of course, finance. One of the things that really stands out about cryptocurrency is that unlike those traditional assets, like houses and cars, seizing crypto, it presents a whole new set of challenges.
Okay, so let's break this down step by step. First things first, the actual seizure. From what I've read, it seems like authorities really prioritize securing that crypto as quickly as possible. Almost like catching a suspect red-handed at a crime scene. Our sources mention that they often work with exchanges to get access to those digital wallets. Is this where we get into like hot wallets versus cold wallets?
You got it. So think of those hot wallets as always being online. They're super convenient for transactions, but that also makes them more vulnerable when it comes to being seized. Cold wallets, on the other hand, those are more like your offline vaults. They offer a lot more security, but you have to put in a bit more effort to access them. It's kind of like that safe deposit box at the bank. Super secure, but not something you're accessing every single day.
So let's say the authorities, they've managed to get a hold of this crypto. We're talking potentially millions, maybe even billions of dollars in digital currency. How do they even keep that safe? I mean, it's not like they can just, stash it under a mattress, right?
Yeah. You're exactly right about that. This is where things get interesting with the whole concept of multi-signature wallets. Imagine if you needed like 2 signatures to withdraw money from a joint bank account, right? Well, a multi-signature wallet, it works in a similar way. Multiple parties need to give the green light before any transactions can happen. This makes it way harder for anyone to just swoop in and steal the seized crypto. And this emphasis on security, it's not just about protecting the assets themselves, it's also about maintaining public trust in the whole process.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've got all this seized crypto. It's tucked away nice and secure in its digital vault. What happens next? They can't just leave it sitting there forever, can they?
Absolutely not. That's where we get to what's called forfeiture. This is the official transfer of ownership of the assets to the government. And let me tell you, it's not as simple as it might sound. We're often talking about legal proceedings, court orders, the whole 9 yards. And of course, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the crypto was connected to some kind of criminal activity.
Makes sense. It's not just a finders keepers situation with cryptocurrency. So once the crypto is officially forfeited, where does it actually go? Does it just kind of get absorbed into some general government fund?
Well, some people might be surprised to learn that a lot of this seized crypto actually ends up being auctioned off. You have agencies like the U.S. Marshals Service. They handle these auctions sometimes publicly, sometimes privately, and they've dealt with some pretty big cases over the years.
Oh, really? Like what kind of cases are we talking about here?
Well, one of the most famous examples would have to be the Silk Road case. Back in 2013, the U.S. government, they confiscated a whopping 144,000 Bitcoin from the Silk Road marketplace. Now, considering how much Bitcoin is worth today, can you even imagine how much that would have been?
Oh, wow. We're talking billions, right? That's insane. But wait a minute. Doesn't the price of Bitcoin, fluctuate wildly? What if the market crashes right before they're about to have this big auction?
Yeah, that's the gamble, isn't it? The sale price of this seized crypto, it all depends on what the market rate is at the exact moment of the auction. One day it could be worth millions, the next, well, you get the picture. But here's something really important to keep in mind. Even if someone's trying to use cryptocurrency anonymously, those transactions, they can actually be traced. And this is all thanks to advancements in blockchain analysis.
So even in the world of crypto, there's no such thing as a truly clean getaway. That's a pretty big takeaway for anyone who's maybe dabbling in cryptocurrency out there. But getting back to these auctions, who actually gets to cash in on all this crypto gold? Where did all that money actually end up going?
It really depends on the specific country. But typically, the proceeds, they end up being used for various government programs. Sometimes it goes into general funds, and sometimes it's used for initiatives that support victims of crime.
So in a way, is this kind of like a modern-day Robin Hood scenario?
Yeah.
taking from the bad guys and then giving back to the community?
You could definitely see it that way. But it's important to remember that the way these funds are allocated, it varies quite a bit from one country to the next. Some prioritize funding for law enforcement, while others might focus more on social programs or even infrastructure projects. Each country has its own unique approach to using this, influx of resources.
So we've talked about the seizure, we've talked about the auctions. What happens if they decide to not auction off all of the seized crypto? Is there ever a situation where they might decide to, hold on to it?
Oh, absolutely. There are times when authorities choose to keep a portion of that seized cryptocurrency.
Why would it do that?
Think of it like holding on to a crucial piece of evidence. It might be helpful for ongoing investigations. For example, they could use it to trace other assets or maybe even uncover connections to larger criminal networks.
Oh, so it's almost like following a trail of digital breadcrumbs that leads them to a bigger bust down the line. That's pretty fascinating. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, I think we need to take a step back for a minute and talk about something we touched on earlier. The whole idea that crypto is supposed to be this decentralized system. So if the government can just step in and seize crypto like this, doesn't that kind of go against the whole point of cryptocurrency in the first place?
You've hit on a really important point there, and it's actually a source of tension in many discussions about the future of cryptocurrency. On the one hand, you've got authorities who are doing everything they can to prevent criminal activity and to protect the integrity of the financial system.
And on the other hand?
On the other hand, you've got these strong proponents of decentralization. They're concerned that too much government intervention could end up stifling innovation and undermining those very principles that make cryptocurrency so appealing in the first place.
So it sounds like there's not really an easy answer here. It's all about finding that balance between, those competing interests.
You got it. It's a delicate balance for sure. Figuring out how to find that sweet spot between the needs of law enforcement and those core values of decentralization. That's one of the biggest challenges facing the world of cryptocurrency today.
So where were we? Yes, we were about to jump into some real-world examples of seized crypto to see how this all plays out in practice.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about seizing crypto in theory, but I think it gets a lot more interesting when we look at actual cases. What have you got for us?
Well, let's start with the Bitfinex case from back in 2016. Hackers managed to steal a massive amount of Bitcoin.
How much are we talking here?
Around 120,000 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
To put that into perspective, that would be worth billions today.
Wow, that's a heist of epic proportions. But wasn't Bitcoin supposed to be untraceable? How did they ever recover those funds? It's a pretty common misconception that Bitcoin is completely anonymous. But the truth is that law enforcement agencies have become incredibly sophisticated at tracking crypto transactions.
Really? So even if someone tries to cover their tracks?
Exactly. Through blockchain analysis techniques, they can often follow the digital trail and connect the dots, even if the transactions were initially thought to be anonymous.
So in the Bitfinex case, were they able to recover the stolen Bitcoin?
They sure were. Fast forward to 2022, and authorities managed to claw back a significant portion of those stolen funds. It was a major victory for law enforcement. And I think it serves as a reminder that even in the world of cryptocurrency, actions have consequences.
That's a really important point, especially for our listeners who might be new to cryptocurrency. There's often this perception that crypto is like the Wild West, a lawless frontier. But this case really shows that there's a growing level of accountability.
Absolutely. Now, I know we talked about how seized crypto often gets auctioned off, but are there ever situations where authorities might decide to hold on to some of it, maybe for a different purpose?
Oh yeah, you mentioned that earlier. What are some reasons why they might do that?
Well, remember how we talked about authorities sometimes retaining crypto to aid ongoing investigations? It can be a really strategic tool, to track down other criminals, uncover hidden assets.
Okay, so it's not just about the financial value. It can also be used as a tool for further investigations.
Precisely. It's a way to leverage seized cryptocurrency to dismantle larger criminal enterprises.
That makes sense. Now, shifting gears a bit, I think we should touch on the ethical considerations surrounding all of this. We've talked about how the government can seize crypto, and we've seen that they can often track transactions even if someone is trying to be anonymous. Doesn't that create some tension with the idea that crypto is supposed to be decentralized?
It's a complex issue, for sure. On one hand, you have those who strongly believe that government intervention is absolutely necessary to prevent criminal activity and, to protect the integrity of the financial system.
Yeah, but what about those who disagree?
Well, on the other hand, you have those who champion decentralization. They're worried that government overreach could stifle innovation and undermine the very principles that make cryptocurrencies so appealing.
It sounds like there's no easy answer then.
It's a balancing act, trying to find that middle ground between the needs of law enforcement and those core values of decentralization. That's a really key challenge that the world of cryptocurrency is facing.
And what about our listeners? Knowing what we know now about how governments can seize and track crypto, what advice would you give to the average person who might be using cryptocurrency?
Well, I think the key takeaway is to use cryptocurrency responsibly and ethically. Always be aware that law enforcement agencies are becoming more and more sophisticated in their ability to track transactions.
So, while crypto might offer some degree of anonymity, it's not a foolproof way to hide illegal activity.
Exactly. If you're using cryptocurrency, it's absolutely essential to do so within the bounds of the law.
Good advice. Now, you mentioned earlier that different countries have different approaches to handling seized crypto. Can you give us some examples of how that plays out in the real world?
Of course, let's start with the United States. They put a huge emphasis on transparency and accountability. Federal agencies actually have to submit these detailed plans to the Department of Justice, outlining exactly how they intend to use seized funds.
So there are systems in place to make sure that the system isn't being abused.
Exactly. Now, the United Kingdom has a similar system where seized assets often get divided among various government agencies and initiatives. That includes things like programs to support victims of crime.
It's like taking the proceeds of crime and using them to help those who have been harmed.
It's a way to create something positive out of a negative situation. In contrast, some countries, like India, are still working on their legal frameworks for handling crypto-related crimes. The procedures can be a lot more complex there, with multiple agencies often involved, and the final destination of those seized funds might not be as clearly defined.
It sounds like there's a lot of variation in how different countries approach this.
Absolutely, which makes sense considering that cryptocurrency is still relatively new on the global stage. As it becomes more integrated into the global financial system, we're likely to see an even wider range of approaches to seizing and managing it. It's a landscape that's constantly evolving.
Speaking of evolving landscapes, we can't talk about this topic without mentioning the Mt. Gox case. That was a pivotal moment in the history of cryptocurrency.
Mt. Gox, a cautionary tale if there ever was one.
For those who might not be familiar, Mt. Gox was once the world's largest Bitcoin exchange. But then, back in 2014, it all came crashing down when they went bankrupt after losing hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin.
It was a devastating loss, both for the exchange and for its users. It really shook people's confidence in the early days of cryptocurrency.
Whatever happened to all those missing Bitcoins? Were they ever recovered?
Well, that's where things get a bit murky. Japanese authorities were able to seize some of the assets, but the majority of those lost Bitcoins have never been accounted for.
Wow. So there's a chance that a digital treasure trove is still out there somewhere, just waiting to be found.
It's a possibility, although I think the chances of recovering those lost Bitcoins are getting slimmer with each passing year. The Mt. Gox case serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of security and risk management in the cryptocurrency world.
It also highlights the responsibility that exchanges have to protect their users' assets. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here today. From the technical details of seizing crypto, to the ethical questions it raises, to those real-world cases that demonstrate just how complex this whole landscape can be. I think there's one final big question that we need to address. What does the future hold for seized cryptocurrency? As cryptocurrency continues to grow, will we see any changes in how it's handled by law enforcement? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? As cryptocurrency becomes more and more a part of our everyday lives, I think it's safe to say we're probably going to see a rise in both the number and the value of these seized assets.
That makes a lot of sense. More crypto out there in the world, well, that just means more opportunities for people to use it for illegal activities. And that means law enforcement is going to have to, keep stepping up their game to stay ahead.
Exactly. It's going to require them to adapt their strategies and who knows, maybe even come up with entirely new techniques to keep pace with how fast cybercrime is evolving these days.
It's like a never-ending race, right? Always
Yeah.
trying to stay one step ahead. But while we're on the topic of the future, I think it's important to remember those lessons from the past. We've seen those cases, some really high-profile ones, where exchanges were hacked or they just collapsed and users ended up losing a ton of money. What can we learn from those events, and how can those lessons help shape the future of seized cryptocurrency?
Those cases are a stark reminder about how important security and risk management are in the world of cryptocurrency. If you're thinking about investing in crypto or using an exchange, do your homework. Look for platforms that have a solid track record, ones that have really strong security measures in place. And remember, even with those reputable exchanges, there's always going to be some level of risk involved.
So it's all about being informed, doing your research, and being cautious, especially when you're dealing with something as volatile and potentially vulnerable as cryptocurrency. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to that big picture question.
Hmm.
What happens to all this seized cryptocurrency once it's in the government's hands? We've talked about how it can be auctioned off or it can be held for strategic reasons. Are there any other possibilities out there? Like, could the government decide to hold on to it as an investment, maybe even use it to directly fund public services?
It's a fascinating question, and one that I think we're going to hear debated more and more in the coming years. Some people argue that for governments, especially when you look at something like Bitcoin, holding onto it could actually be a really smart long-term investment strategy. But then you have others who are concerned that it could create conflicts of interest or even give governments too much control over the cryptocurrency market. It's a complex issue for sure.
Well, it seems like complexity and uncertainty are kind of the running themes of this entire deep dive. But even with all those challenges and all those unknowns, it's pretty clear that cryptocurrency is here to stay. And as its role in our lives continues to grow, that question of what happens to seized crypto, that's only going to become even more important.
I think you're right about that. It's definitely a question that deserves our attention and our careful consideration. There are so many different factors at play: legal, ethical, financial, technological. It's this fascinating intersection of so many different fields.
It really is. And it's been a fascinating deep dive for us, too. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the very first step of seizing that cryptocurrency all the way to those potential final destinations. We've looked at the legal processes involved, the security measures, the ethical considerations, and even how all of this impacts individual users. If there's one thing we hope you take away from this deep dive, it's that the world of cryptocurrency, it's constantly changing. What seems like a settled issue today, well, tomorrow could be a whole different story. So stay informed, stay curious, and most importantly, stay engaged in the conversation.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And with that, we want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of seized cryptocurrency. It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
And of course, we have to give a massive thank you to Paralogic.com for making this deep dive possible. You guys are the best. Be sure to check them out and tell our friend George we said hello. Until next time, keep exploring and keep diving deep.